Oh, it's Andy Picken from Royal Wellness here, and this afternoon I've got Lawrence Mellor. Hello, Lawrence.
Hi, Andy. Thanks for having me.
And as part of our conversational podcast that we have on various subjects, we're touching on Hydration Week. Lawrence, you're a speech and language therapist, so we're just going to have a chat around voice care and vocal care and the links with hydration. But first of all, just tell us a bit about your role.
Yeah, so I'm a speech and language therapist at Chesterfield Royal. For colleagues that might have seen myself or my colleagues about, they probably know us from visiting the wards and doing swallow assessments with patients with problems with their swallowing and finding ways to find food and drink which are safe or comfortable for them, or from doing communication assessments for people that are struggling with that so that they can meet their needs. But one of the other areas that we work in, which is the one I'm going to touch on today more than anything, is we see patients with voice problems. So that's more to do with the quality of your voice, which can be at the extreme end where someone completely loses their voice. Or it can be some vocal hoarseness, for example, and that's the sort of thing that a lot of us might have experienced, maybe even on a temporary basis. And so it's useful to know about general vocal hygiene, a lot of which relates back to nutrition and hydration, and ways to look after your voice. Particularly, a lot of our colleagues, the way we use our voices, either on the wards or increasingly through things like Teams, like we're doing today, and the new challenges that we have with that.
And these, as I've noticed, when we're wearing PPE, you tend to have a bit of a muffled voice. You shout louder. I've done it myself. So there's some things like that. So in terms of, hydration, then, for example, so what should we be looking at in terms of looking after our voice in particular and drinking regularly throughout the day, for example?
Yeah, so it can vary person to person based on, your body composition and things like that as to how much specifically you need to drink. But it's just important to reinforce the point of staying hydrated through the day, which is really the best thing, is taking regular sips throughout the day. If you notice some of the signs, like just your mouth feeling dry, or sometimes from feeling a bit hydrated, you might start to feel a bit fatigued, and often that can be a sign that you might be slightly dehydrated. But the key thing is just taking sips throughout the day. In relation to voice specifically, so explaining it in relation to how the voice works, the starting point is if you've got your breath support, so your lungs, which your diaphragm, the muscles around your tummy help to expand. That's the power of your voice. But then it's passing through these structures in your voice box, which is all housed inside what you think of as your Adam's apple. That's all the structures that produce your voice are inside there in that small space. Your vocal cords are about the size of your thumbnail. And so for men, the vocal cords vibrate about 100 times per second. And for women, that's about 200 times per second on average.
I love that stat, Lawrence. I can't wait to go tell my partner that one. So double the amount of effort from women's voice cords.
Yes, yeah. Well, it's actually to do with the frequency. So because they, on average, women have a higher pitch, more voice, then the higher frequency means more vibrations per second. But yes, you could make the analogy that, make a broader point of women having to work harder in
it's great. I'm all for that. But yeah, that's an interesting one, isn't it? With how the voice box is made and the fact that these cords need to vibrate more, so that they're getting strained. I suppose in some ways a little bit more in women. Would that be fair to say?
Well, they do. You could say work harder, twice as hard if you look at the figures. Yeah. So and there is a higher prevalence of voice problems among women. But But so because the vocal cords need to vibrate so many times per second, they're working really hard through the day, which they can tolerate. It's what they're designed to do. But in order to help them along, it's important to bear in mind key vocal care points. So some of those do relate to nutrition and hydration. So in terms of nutrition, let's start with hydration actually. So in terms of hydration, because they're working so hard, vibrating together, then they can become irritated, particularly if they're working hard all day. But if they're not lubricated, which in order to stay lubricated, your body needs to be hydrated, produces a kind of mucus which coats those tissues to help them along. And so if you're staying hydrated through the day, then you can help that along and to prevent your voice from becoming more tired. You mentioned about masks as well. So yeah, at the moment you are sometimes having to speak louder in order to be heard, because they muffle your voice. And if I speak to you like this, you might quickly realize that you do rely on lip reading as well as reading body language in order to understand people. So the masks present a new challenge in that you might need to feel you need to use your voice more loudly in order to be heard. Also with things like Zoom or Teams, you cut out some of the body language, and so you're really focusing just on, sometimes you lose the video connection altogether and you're just going off voice, and then the quality of that can vary. So all these things put an additional strain on your voice. But yes, hydration certainly is key in order to keep things working as they should be.
So I'm thinking the takeaway message from that is sipping regular hydration throughout the day, making it a priority. And we touched on also nutrition as well. So certain foods that might exasperate or irritate the vocal cords. Just touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, so things that irritate the vocal cords. Well, one of the links back to that could be through the nutrition side of things, actually. So one of the common things when people present in our clinics that they have difficulties with their voice, that can be secondary to reflux. So people having acid reflux, that because the two tubes, your food pipe and your windpipe, are located close to one another. If you experience reflux, then that acid can actually spill over and inflame the vocal cords. And we've all, to greater or lesser extent, at some point experienced acid reflux. You'd notice through the foods that you eat, particularly if you've had spicy foods or oily foods, you might find that the following morning you feel a bit hoarse in your voice, or you actually feel having reflux. That's not always through heartburn. Not everyone gets that. And you might only experience actually the effects on the tissues in your throat. So rather than feeling it in your chest, the acid can irritate your throat. So things to avoid if you know you're prone to reflux, or just to generally have in moderation, would be spicy foods, acidic foods, and because they can increase the acid in your stomach, and particularly if you have been prone to reflux, can re-inflame already sensitive tissues. And then other foods act in different ways. So oily foods can cause the areas in your esophagus where there's a narrowing called a sphincter. They relax in response to having certain foods like oily foods and make you more prone to reflux. So oily, acidic and spicy foods, good ones to be aware, can cause reflux and can cause then more irritation of the throat and affect your voice.
So I'm going to remember that OSA, oily, spicy, acidic. So if we look at those foods in terms of what irritates us, we could moderate that and balance it if it affects us. And you also mentioned maybe timing of foods. I know when we spoke separately, so, you know, eating too close to bedtime, for example.
Yeah, definitely. So trying to eat not within 2 or 3 hours of bed, actually. Then because of how far down the digestive tract your food's got, so that it's settled, and then gravity, you can imagine you're more prone to reflux if you go to bed with a full stomach and not fully digested. I mean, you start to see a pattern that there's certain scenarios we're all familiar with. If you go for a night out, you have a lot of drinks which aren't necessarily for hydration. Then you go maybe last thing to get some food, possibly spicy, possibly oily, and go straight to bed. Then those are some of the times when we've all maybe experienced the direct effects of these things. So you can see how they start to stack up as well and aren't always in isolation, but those are some of the key things. Yeah.
So as workers in the NHS, in particular to Chesterfield, as takeaway messages as we wrap this up in terms of nutrition, hydration, and just general voice care, floor's yours.
Yeah, so you've got the nutrition and the hydration side of things. They're really important. You kind of need to take voice care in general all together, though, because it's something which is worth being aware of, that we can all be doing just to get the best out of our voice. So we also touched on things like how the masks, they can make us feel the need to strain our voices more. Also with colleagues working on the wards, that can make it feel like it's harder to take a drink because you know you can't take the mask off. But building in that time to go somewhere where you can safely remove the mask and take sips of water throughout the day, to make sure that you are hydrated, and being conscious of the fact that you are maybe having to strain your voice more in order to be heard, because you've got this slight barrier to communicating with people from what we are used to. Another thing to consider would be the additional problems when working remotely. So there are certain extra demands on the voice due to that. Certain things like, the fact that you might have less than perfect connection some of the time, so you feel like you're not able to be heard. I'm not practicing what I preach today, but one of the things which can be good is to have a headset, so that you've got a mic close to your mouth, so that you know that that's going to properly amplify your voice. Either going into your computer, or if you're using phones, you can get ones that adapt for your phone. Often the headphones that come with your phone have a small built-in mic, and that way you're not feeling the need to use your voice in an extremely different way to what you would speaking to someone in person. But other things, just like the way that working from home has changed the structure of our days, it can be easy to take calls back to back because you've not got those natural pauses in between.
Absolutely.
So making sure you build it in, to have a rest in between. And some of the other things is like, because you've taken away some of those natural things like body language, that we rely on so much subconsciously, you kind of just the general fatigue, because you're so focused on this one thing, what you can see, or failing that, just what you can hear. Sometimes you have to be laser focused, and you sometimes might find it feel restless because you want to be expressing yourself in the ways that we normally do with our body language and things like that. So factoring in those breaks to rest your voice, but also just to take a break, rather than putting meetings back to back. And then finally, something that would be useful to look at is some simple voice exercises actually that you can do, that anyone can do, which can just help to create a more neutral posture in the throat to help those muscles relax. So a quick one that I'll show you today, which links quite well into the hydration side of things, is this involves blowing bubbles through water. So I've got a glass here. That's partly just to demonstrate being clear so that you can see what I'm doing. But you could use a water bottle. You could use a straw with that. So this is a really simple exercise which I'll just demonstrate. And then I can explain a little bit about what it's doing. So if you have some water, not too much because it can tend to overflow and you don't want to cover your keyboard or whatever else you might have around you in water. But the first part would be just blowing a steady stream of bubbles through some water. So I'll just angle this so you can see a little bit better. So just a small amount of water here. Just simply blowing some bubbles through water. That's doing a few things. So actually, you can see the bubbles, so you've got a good airflow, and we talked about that being a key component of the voice. So you've got that good airflow, you can see that for feedback. And then the next stage then would be actually using your voice as well. So if you felt like having a go, you can then use your voice with that. So you're essentially saying ooh sort of through the tube, but you're going to do that into the water at the same time. And all the while also trying to relax, so you're not tensing in your face, in your jaw, in your shoulders or neck. So you're getting the good airflow, you're using your voice at the same time, so you're using that airflow to produce your voice. And what you're actually doing there is, because the air isn't coming out just directly through your mouth, it's what we call semi-occluded vocal tract exercise. So the part that's occluded is through the straw because it's a narrow gap, and then through the water as well. And you can feel a bit of the pressure in your cheeks. You might feel a flutter while you do the exercise. That's good. It means your cheeks are relaxed as well. And because you're occluding the vocal tract slightly, it means that some of that air is allowed to go backwards, bounces back, creates a pressure in your oral cavity, but also in your throat, and opens things up so that they're more open while you're producing a voice, and makes it easier to produce a voice. And that's a little warm up you can do for your voice a couple of times a day, or just once in the morning, or at the end of the day when your voice feels tired. You could even do it during the day. Most people carry water bottles with them nowadays as well, and these reusable straws, as well as making Greta happy. It's useful. You can carry those around and reuse them as many times as you want, chuck them in a bag and they're not crumpled or anything. So that's a easy voice exercise you can do. So I guess actually just to summarize some of the key points then, some of the things you can do: keeping good posture. So this particularly applies if you're sitting at a computer screen. We can start to sort of hunch to try and see the screen. Keep good posture so you're not impeding the air from coming through your vocal tract easily. So you've got good breath support. Minimizing background noise, so not trying to talk over radios in the background. If you're working from home or in an office, you can manage that to a lesser degree in a ward, but it's good, for example, if you're talking with patients, to turn off the television so that they can hear you as well, but to protect your voice. Using a headset so that you're amplifying your voice, and that means you less likely to need to strain. But also, we've all tried to talk with a phone crooked on your shoulder while you're trying to type. If you have, sorry, I didn't get that. Sorry, Andy. I think I might have lost you there. Sorry, can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Sorry,
well,
yeah.
This is a good example of technology when it does have a little glitch. So this is a little reality check in the vodcast of when we might be shouting, going, hello, straight.
Exactly, yeah. So, I mean, you almost couldn't go a call without having an example of that. And these things crop up all the time. Either the sound's not great, so you're shouting, hello, can you hear me? Or, you know, you're relying just on the sound, so you kind of feel more of a need to be heard. And these are all additional barriers we come across. But sorry, yeah, so using a headset, that means as well as amplifying your voice in that way, it also means you're not having to try and maybe hold the phone in awkward ways, which can put strain on different muscles. Taking a break between calls, you know, factor those in, get a drink, but also just rest your voice, take a minute. Relieving tension, so, you know, any gentle exercises you can do to tension in your shoulders and your neck. Again, even more so when you're at a computer all day, that sort of gentle shoulder rolls, head turns to the side and up and down to kind of just release some of the tension there that might build up. Doing warm-up exercises, so like blowing your bubbles, to warm your voice up and to undo some of that tension that can build up through the day. And finally, once again, staying hydrated.
And what I'm going to say there is if anybody comes in my office and they see me doing walking on the spot when I'm on meetings or doing a little squat, I'll now be blowing bubbles into a glass. So if anybody comes in there, that'll be part of my routine. But I think what you're saying is these habits of self-care, whether that's looking after yourself physically and going for a walk or taking a mental break and releasing pressure out your shoulders, can also apply to the voice as well. So be mindful to give it a rest, staging those breaks in, keep hydrated. The bigger picture is actually for whole body systems, including the voice and vocal cords, which we don't really think about. You've made me think today, really. It's often something I don't think about, but actually is key to putting into those healthy routines and habits as well.
Yeah, it's just thinking holistically, and some of those things that generally we need to be thinking about, you know, giving yourself breaks, all of those things can affect your voice, but it's thinking about it holistically, as is this nutrition hydration month. You'll have seen, speaking to various people, how important it is, and it impacts one area, but it's just generally good to consider these things.
Absolutely. So that's the bigger picture. So just thank you for your time anyway, Lawrence. I've certainly learned some stuff, and I'm sure people that tune into this will as well. So keep tuned and we'll have more stuff on. But thank you for your time anyway.
No, thanks for the opportunity. Great to speak to you.
Thank you.